Welcome everybody to Outrival Racing and our series, So You Want to Be a Triathlete. Today I'm going to talk about everything that has to do with Ironman. So the presentation today is So You Want to Be an Ironman Triathlete. I'm going to give you 5 short tips that are good for either first-timers that are just trying to get to the finish line, as well as seasoned Ironman triathletes. All right, so the top 5 tips for Ironman in general are, number 1, to train right. And I'll give you some specifics on how to train specifically for Ironman. Number 2 is to get an individual race fueling plan that addresses your sodium losses and sodium needs, as well as a little bit of potassium and magnesium, as well as your carbohydrate needs, your protein needs, and then obviously your fluid needs. Number 3 is to get mentally tough during the training, obviously, and then to stay mentally tough as the taper process begins, and then leading into race week. And then also some tools and some tips on staying mentally tough and staying focused on race day and staying relaxed. And then the last tip that we have for becoming an Ironman or becoming a better Ironman would be to obey Cardinal Rule number 1, which is don't get injured, don't get sick, and just remember that consistency is key, both in training and on race day. So we'll talk a lot about Cardinal Rule number 1. So tip number 1 is all about training and training for Ironman. Obviously, you want to have a plan. You want to have a pretty structured plan, but then you also want to allow that plan to have some ebb and flow based on your schedule, based on how you feel, based on if you're getting sick or feeling like you're getting an injury. But by and large, you want to have a well-structured plan starting at least 16 to 22 weeks out. Typically, we recommend that most age group athletes take a 3-week base or build phase followed by a recovery week to add some ebb and flow to the training. We also recommend that you respect what we call sustainable volume, and that's basically how much your body can absorb. So it's really easy to get trapped or to fall under the trap of I've got to do X, Y, Z because my friend is doing that for an Ironman, when you have to respect your individual body and how much training you can absorb. Obviously, you don't want to get injured, you don't want to get sick, but you also don't want to just do junk mileage. So quantity is often quality when it comes to Ironman training, meaning aerobic volume is usually the most important tool that most athletes can focus on. But with that being said, you also have to respect your body and how much it can handle at any given time. Another good rule of thumb for Ironman is that you want to target 5 over-distance bikes and then over-distance runs. Obviously, you want to make sure that your body can handle this and that you slowly progress up to these overload workouts. And by overload for a bike, we mean anything over about 85 or 90 miles with a little brick run on top of that so that it forces you to practice race nutrition. And then for an over-distance run, anything over about 1 hour and 50 to 2 hours is what we consider an over-distance run. So you want to target 5 over-distance runs, over-distance bikes, bricks, as just a general rule of thumb. Also, we see across the board, and we're a team of 45 coaches, we've got thousands of Ironman finishers, successful Ironman finishers. Probably the number one mistake that we see with training is that athletes put too much emphasis on that long run. They just want to check the box. I've done a 20-miler, I've done an 18-miler, I've done a 22-miler. And in our opinion, that's just too darn long. So we definitely recommend that you de-emphasize that long run. Keep your long runs in check. We don't recommend running anything longer than a 2-hour and 40-minute long run, unless maybe you split the long run into 2 runs for the day, like an hour and 30 in the morning and an hour and 30 in the evening, and maybe a little bit longer, or a 2-hour in the morning and a 45-minute in the evening. If you tend to be a slower runner and you'll be out there longer, then you can do a long run. Just make sure that you incorporate a lot of walking breaks. So if you're going to do a 4-hour session, make sure that it's a run to walk ratio of maybe 10 minutes jogging to 3 minutes walking, so that you don't run more than about 240, definitely no more than 3 hours of running in any given session. The recovery just takes too long. Last would be to make sure that you practice good restorative techniques. What we see with a lot of athletes, particularly Ironman athletes that are busy with a job and busy with family and also training, is that they're not necessarily falling into overtraining, they're just under-resting. So you want to make sure that you get at least on average 7.5 hours sleep. If you can't get that during the work week, then try and catch up on the weekends. But try not to go too long sacrificing sleep, or else it'll undermine everything. You'll run into sickness, illness, stagnation of fitness. So definitely sleep is number one. Eating well, eating small, frequent meals every 2 to 3 hours to keep blood sugar stable is also very important. So just keep in mind that your restorative techniques, your sleep, your nutrition, your body work, massage, stretch, even core work to some extent, Normatex, those are all really important in the training process. And when you're starting to feel overly fatigued, maybe instead of looking at how much you're training, look at how much you're resting or not resting. Tip number 2 is to get an individualized custom race plan that is set for your body. And that's tough to do. We typically recommend you put yourself through a sweat rate test. Core Diet, which is also part of Outrival Racing and QT2 Systems, we offer those. It's probably our most popular service because we tap into an athlete's actual sweat loss, and then we make recommendations on sodium replenishment and carbohydrate replenishment. But even if you don't do a race fueling plan through us, find some way to quantify your sweat rates and your sodium losses and then your sodium needs. So figure out what your sweat rate is, and then also try and figure out what your carbohydrate loss and then obviously your carbohydrate needs are, and then just get a good race fueling plan. The 3 things that need to be focused on, which a lot of people neglect, are carbohydrates. Obviously, that's the fuel that you need to keep on going. Sodium, that's the most important electrolyte that's lost, although potassium and magnesium are also important. And then fluids. So get a good race fueling plan that is set for your body, the intensity that you're going to race, how long you'll be out there, and make sure that you focus on those 3 things. Carbohydrates with a little bit of protein, typically on the bike, maybe a little bit of solid on the bike, and then sodium needs, and then fluid needs. We also highly recommend that you practice your race fueling plan to a T, at least on every long session. You can have the best race fueling plan in the world. If you don't practice it, 1, you can't learn how to perfect that plan, but 2, you won't teach your gut to process carbohydrates and to process the stuff that you need on race day. So definitely 6 to 10 weeks out, go out of your way on each and every long session for sure, if not every session that you do, to practice exactly how you're going to fuel on race day. That's very important. That's usually the number 1 limiter that we see at Ironman. Has nothing to do with training, has nothing to do with the mental game, has nothing to do with pacing. It has to do with hydration and fueling and making sure that those match your individual needs. All right, tip number 3 is to get mental. You've all heard the cliche or the statement that, sport is 90% physical, or 90% mental and 10% physical, and there's definitely some truth to that. I think Ironman is probably more 90% physical and then 10% mental, but the mental side is very, very important. So make sure during the training process that you do what you need to do to stay motivated. You've signed up for the race, find a way to stay committed. It's really easy to fall out of that commitment, especially with the stressors of everyday life. So obviously motivation is probably the biggest key from a mental perspective that we need to focus on during the training process. During the taper phase, we switch from not necessarily being dealing with motivation issues, but then dealing with more kind of anxiety and just overall stress heading into the race. The mind knows what it's about to put the body through, and that's really overwhelming. I mean, it's a long distance. So as you enter into the taper phase, you definitely want to focus on doing things that relax the mind, and that's usually the time to step back from just focusing so much on Ironman. It's the time to quit looking at results, quit looking at course descriptions. Don't worry about what your buddies are doing, but really just focus on staying relaxed, keeping mentally relaxed in the taper phase. In the taper phase, you're also going to, obviously, for those of you that have tapered for an Ironman or any race in general that you're really focused on, you'll go through some ebb and flows, because as your body rests up, it just does some funky things. Expect that. Expect that you're going to feel very tired one day and then fresh the next day, and you're just going to have a bumpy road. Again, some of this is psychosomatic. Just trust the taper process. Expect that you're going to feel like you're on a roller coaster there those 3 and even 2 weeks out. That's very normal as the body physically rests up. Just keep the mind strong and trust the taper process. The fourth tip would be to strive for an ideal performance state. And this is kind of textbook mental fitness stuff. So leading into race week, we like to think of what we call the ideal performance state. 1 being you could care less, and 10 being you're so overly anxious that you're about to have a panic attack. Somewhere in the middle, so somewhere at the top of kind of that inverse U is what we call the ideal performance state, where you're mentally relaxed, but you're also excited. You've got enough excitement to really get you through the race and have the best race that you can, but you're not overly anxious or nervous that it's going to undermine your outcome. So just focus on that as you head into race week, particularly those last 48 to 72 hours. Stay relaxed. If you're finding yourself, if you're finding that you're becoming overly anxious, do something else. Watch a movie, get your mind off triathlon. Just do something to mentally keep relaxed race week. And then same on race day. The irony of Ironman, or I guess any race in general, is that when that gun goes off, everybody's nervous up until the minute the gun goes off. The minute the gun goes off, you're not nervous anymore. So just know on race day that typically it's not anxiety or nerves that get the best of us. It typically is not staying positive, not staying mentally focused, not staying focused at least the first 2/3 of the race on the goals, which the goals should be execution type goals. How should I feel? How should I pace? What heart rate should I target? What should I mentally be thinking? So make sure on race day that you focus on the goals and the targets, not the outcomes. The outcomes are, how am I placing? What's my time going to be? Am I going to get a slot to Kona? Am I going to beat my best friend? We definitely recommend that at least until 2/3 of the way through the run for Ironman, that you just focus on your own individual pacing plan, your own individual targets, and then just let the race and let your competitors do what they need to do. Until the last, maybe 10% of the race, then you can start to take risks, start focusing on where you're at in the race, what your time is going to be, where you are placement-wise. But until then, just focus on your own individual race execution and stay focused, stay positive. The last thing from a mental perspective that is probably the biggest tip would be, seriously, this sounds really corny, but get ready for battle. This is a really long race. It's really tough. So mentally prepare, obviously, physically prepare, nutrition and hydration prepare. Treat this seriously. And be ready to suffer. Your body is going to suffer even if you do everything right. If you get everything nailed perfectly, it's an Ironman. It's going to be hard. So just be ready for that mentally. Don't be afraid of that. Once the going gets tough, stay tough mentally, and just stay focused. Stay cognizant of what's going on in terms of your pacing and your fueling so that you can stay in control. That's very important. All right, the fourth plan for Ironman is to get a good race pacing plan. You want to make sure that you pace from the swim to the bike to the run throughout the whole day, very nice and steady. Within the swim itself, you want to make sure that you don't go out too hard at the beginning. You might want to, if it's a mass start, those are becoming fewer and far between. But if it's a mass start, then you might jump off the front just to get cleaner space. But after that, settle in, find a nice steady rhythm, keep it nice and evenly paced. And then once you get on the bike, same thing. The best well-executed triathlons we see have a bike where the heart rate and the power is relatively stable. If it's a rolling hills course or you've got a lot of wind, then you definitely will see more power spikes. We definitely recommend that you keep the power within 30 to 50 watts on the uphills and into headwinds. You keep that range, within 30 to 50 watts of your average targets. Heart rate's nice and steady across the board, same with cadence. And then also moving on to the run, same thing. For whatever reason, we see in open run races, we tend to see that the best well-executed races have a heart rate that slowly creeps up, where the pace is nice and steady. In triathlon, we see almost the exact opposite, and that's mostly because we're starting from a fatigued and depleted glycogen state on the run because we're coming off the bike. And that's where we see a even heart rate and a little bit of a drop-off in pace. If you can minimize that drop off to where it's about no more than about a minute drop off from start to finish, then you've done well, especially if you've kept that heart rate nice and steady. So if you think about it, anything that leads to a low heart rate, whether it's GI distress, which is a fueling issue, whether it's poorly pacing, going too hard at the beginning, that the peripheral system, the legs just can't keep up, whether it's just under fueling or leading to the porta pot, all of those are going to bring the heart rate down to 85, 90 because we're doing an Ironman shuffle or a walk, or we're in the porta pot, or even in the med tent. So we want to avoid at all costs having that heart rate plunge. So at the beginning of an Ironman run, we want to make sure that when you look down, you want to make sure that you look down at your heart rate and ask yourself, can I finish all the way to the end at this heart rate? If the answer is no, slow yourself down, find a heart rate that you can stay in across the whole marathon, and that'll be the best executed run that you can do for that day. We also tend to see from bike to run that we want to have the same offset, at least the same threshold offset that we have as individuals. So if you have a threshold offset of 8 beats, meaning your run is 8 beats higher than your bike threshold, and we typically want to see at least a 4 to 8 beat average heart rate difference from bike to run in race execution. So the best, just to sum it up, the best well-executed races are ones where the bike is nice and steady from start to finish, where an average heart rate is lower than the average heart rate on the run. And then same with the run, nice average heart rate, you don't see a big drop off. Last thing from a pacing plan perspective would be to just know that this is what we call a thinking man's race. You have time to correct any error you've made. If you went out too hard on the bike, which is the #1 mistake we see on that first hour of the bike, everybody hammers it, they feel great, they're tapered, they're well rested, they're eager, and they forget they have to run a marathon. Make sure that that you know that you can correct that mistake. If you went too hard, back it off, you can still salvage the day. Same thing with fueling, or even with the mental game. If you get into some fueling issues, GI distress, even get on your pity pot mentally, you can reverse that. It's a long enough day that if you just slow down, maybe even walk a little bit, go easy, ask yourself, what does my body need? Does it need fluids? Does it need to slow down? Does it need a mental check? Almost any error that you can encounter, you can reverse if you just take some time and slow down and think. All right, the last tip is what we call Cardinal Rule #1, and that is do not get injured. If you can't get to the start line, you cannot get to the finish line. So during training, you might have this grandiose, glorious plan of getting to, I don't know, a 250-mile bike week and running a 20-mile long run. Know that if you get injured on that long run, such that you get a stress fracture or an Achilles or plantar injury that's so bad that you can't even really toe the line, that's obviously not a good thing. So respect Cardinal Rule #1 as you move through your training process. Respect that maybe if you give up one workout, if you have a scratchy throat, it's better to give up one workout than to push through that and then be sick and out for 3 to 5 days. So Cardinal Rule #1 is don't get injured, don't get sick. Try to recognize the precursors to true injuries and to full-fledged illnesses, and try to avoid those. Consistency is key, so you definitely want to make sure that you try and avoid major disruptions. When in doubt, cut it out. If you are overly tired, particularly heading into a quality run session, we definitely recommend that it's always better to err on the side of conservative and not run the risk of really getting sick or injured. Again, towing the line has to happen before you can cross the finish line. So just keep that in mind. For soft tissue injuries, we want to make sure that we don't train any more than about a 3 out of 10 on the pace scale, where 1 is, just minor little irritation, 10 is a dagger in your back. A 3 is where you might feel that soft tissue injury or that soft tissue issue, but it's not serious pain. It's not making you run or bike funny. It's not altering your gait. So anything that feels like it's more than a 3, we recommend that you just skip that workout. If it's a run workout, we recommend that you either replace that with cycling or a little bit of aqua jogging. If it's a bike workout, then you can replace it with some strength workout as long as you're not aggravating that injury. If it's a swim workout, same thing. You can replace it with a little bit of upper body work as long as you're not aggravating that injury. So we definitely recommend that you try and keep on moving for soft tissue injuries and do as much as your body will allow as long as it's relatively pain-free and is not progressing the injury. All right, bonus tip is to just remind you to enjoy the journey of training for Ironman. Yes, becoming an Ironman is incredible. That day is going to be incredible. It's going to be a lifelong memory, but so is the journey. So enjoy the journey. Make sure that it doesn't over-consume you so much that your family ends up hating you because you've completely neglected them, that you don't lose touch with the rest of your life. We see that a lot. People just get so focused that it can just lead to other problems in life, and which ultimately undermines their performance at Ironman. So enjoy the journey. Don't get too obsessed with it. If you have, if all of a sudden you have a soccer game that you have to attend and that's going to mess up your long ride, so be it. So allow a little bit of disruption, obviously. Keep it in perspective. Enjoy the training process. Enjoy the friendships that you make. Enjoy the swims, the bikes, the runs. At the end of the day, you will become an Ironman. An Ironman is like the exclamation point on the journey. So enjoy the journey and you'll become an Ironman. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You can go to our website at outrivalracing.com, and right on the homepage, if you submit a question, it'll come to either me or somebody at Outrival Racing, and we'll answer you very quickly. Hope you learned something. Thanks. Bye.